Katie had no idea what Bondrite meant, but she could see that something had changed. Vexthor was staring at their joined hands like he had never seen such a thing before. His grip was warm and surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he could crush steel. The glow in his palm had stopped spreading, frozen in place by whatever she had accidentally done. "What's Bondrite?" Katie asked, not letting go because she sensed that might be a mistake. Something about this moment felt important, like she had stumbled onto the only possible path that didn't end with her in chains. Vexthor's other hands moved slowly, carefully, as if he were handling something fragile. He pulled his hand back gently, and Katie let him go. The glow on his palm faded to a dull shimmer. He looked at her for a long moment, his amber eyes scanning her face like he was seeing her for the first time. "Bondrite is an ancient Korath custom," Vexthor said finally. His voice had lost some of its cold professional edge. "When a blood hunter comes to claim their quarry, the quarry may offer a specific challenge. Hand-to-hand, eye-to-eye, direct contact initiated by the one being hunted. It is a demand that the hunter prove their worth not through domination, but through partnership. If accepted, the hunter must complete a task chosen by the quarry. Success transfers the debt to a bond of mutual obligation. Failure voids the debt entirely." Katie's heart was pounding. She had accidentally found a loophole, and from the look on Vexthor's face, it was one he hadn't expected. "And you have to accept it? You can't just ignore what I did?" "I cannot," Vexthor said, and something that might have been respect flickered in his expression. "I am bound by the old laws of my people, not just the codes of the Commerce Authority. Bondrite has not been invoked in over 300 years, but it remains valid. Your gesture was exact whether you knew it or not. Hand offered freely, grip firm, eye contact maintained, no hesitation. These are the traditional signs. I must honor them or bring shame to my entire line." Katie felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. She had bought herself time, but she still didn't understand what she had gotten herself into. "So I get to choose a task? Anything I want?" "Within reason," Vexthor said. He moved to her workbench and set down his tablet, then gestured for her to sit. Katie remained standing, not ready to show weakness by sitting while he towered over her. Vexthor seemed to notice this and, surprisingly, sat himself on a nearby crate, bringing his eyes closer to her level. The task must be achievable, and must relate to the debt or the circumstances surrounding it. It cannot be impossible, and it cannot be frivolous. "I will judge whether your proposed task meets these requirements." Katie's mind raced through possibilities. She could ask him to reduce the debt, but that wouldn't solve the fundamental problem. She could ask for more time to pay, but she still wouldn't have the money. What she really needed was to understand how her father had accumulated this debt in the first place. Daniel Morrison had been a lot of things, but he had never been stupid with money. 200,000 credits was an enormous sum, and the fact that he had never mentioned it made no sense. "I want you to help me find out the truth about my father's debt," Katie said, the words coming together as she spoke them. What the money was for, why he owed it, and whether the debt is legitimate. "If he was set up or if the debt is false, then it should be void. That's my task. Help me investigate and we'll both know whether I really owe anything." Vexthor was quiet for a long moment, his 4 hands resting calmly on his knees. His amber eyes studied her, and Katie got the distinct impression he was seeing past her dirty work clothes and grease-stained skin to something deeper. Finally, he nodded slowly. "This is an acceptable task," he said. "It relates directly to the debt, and it is achievable. I have access to records and contacts throughout the galaxy. I can track the origins of this obligation and determine its validity. However, I must add a condition of my own. If we discover that the debt is legitimate, that your father received goods or services worth 200,000 credits and failed to fulfill his end of the bargain, you will accept my original terms without further argument. No appeals, no delays, no additional challenges." Katie swallowed hard. It was a gamble, but it was the only chance she had. If her father really had cheated the syndicate, she supposed she would have to face the consequences. But something in her gut told her there was more to this story. Her father had been secretive and sometimes reckless, but he had loved her. He wouldn't have left her with an impossible debt unless something had gone very wrong. "I agree," Katie said, and she held out her hand again. This time, Vexthor took it without hesitation. His grip was firm, and Katie felt a strange warmth spread from his palm into hers. The glow she had seen before returned, brighter now, and she watched in fascination as delicate patterns of light spread across both their palms like living tattoos. The sensation wasn't painful, but it was intense, like electricity without the shock. When Vexthor released her hand, the patterns remained glowing softly against her skin. "We are marked now," Vexthor said, showing her his own palm where identical patterns glowed. "This is the bond sign. It will remain for 30 days, the traditional period for completing a bond-right task. During this time, we are linked. We can sense each other's presence, and we cannot be separated by more than one planetary system without causing pain to both of us. It is meant to ensure cooperation and prevent betrayal." Katie stared at her glowing palm. The patterns were beautiful in a strange way, like circuits of light embedded under her skin. She could feel Vexthor's presence now, a steady warmth at the edge of her awareness. It should have felt invasive, but instead it felt oddly reassuring, like she wasn't alone anymore. "So we have 30 days to investigate my father's debt," Katie said, trying to focus on the practical aspects rather than the strangeness of the situation. "Where do we start?" "With the debt contract itself," Vexthor said, activating his tablet and pulling up a holographic display. "The syndicate claims your father received a shipment of medical supplies worth 200,000 credits, which he was to deliver to an independent colony called New Haven. The supplies were never delivered, and the colony was destroyed shortly afterward in what was officially declared a plague outbreak. Your father died 6 months later, and the debt was transferred to you as his heir." Katie frowned as she studied the holographic documents. Something about the timeline felt wrong. New Haven was destroyed? I never heard about that. "Independent colonies fail regularly," Vexthor said with a shrug. "The galaxy is vast and not every settlement succeeds. However, you are correct that this is suspicious. If the colony was destroyed, there would be no one to verify whether the supplies were delivered or not. The syndicate could easily claim non-delivery without evidence to the contrary. My father kept logs of all his runs," Katie said, excitement building. "Every delivery, every route, every payment." He was paranoid about having records in case anyone ever accused him of theft or non-delivery. If he made this run to New Haven, there will be a log entry. His personal files are still in his old quarters on the station. They sealed them after he died, but I have authorization to access them as his heir. Vexthor stood, his full height once again emphasizing how imposing he was. "Then that is where we begin. Show me these quarters." Katie grabbed her jacket and led Vexthor out of her workshop. The station corridors were crowded with the usual mix of humans and aliens, traders and workers going about their business. More than a few people stopped to stare at Vexthor, and Katie saw fear in their eyes. Bloodhunters were known across the galaxy, and no one wanted to be noticed by one. She felt strange walking beside him, half terrified and half protected. They reached the sealed quarters in the old residential sector. Katie pressed her palm to the access panel, and the door slid open with a hiss of stale air. Daniel Morrison's quarters were exactly as he had left them 2 years ago. Clothes still hung in the closet. Dishes sat in the small sink. A photo of Katie as a teenager stood on the desk, smiling in front of the ship that had brought them to Meridian 7. Katie felt her throat tighten. She hadn't been back here since the funeral. It hurt too much. But now she forced herself to move to the desk and activate the old computer terminal. Her father's files were still there, password protected but easy for her to access. She knew all his codes. Within minutes, she was scrolling through shipping logs from 3 years ago. "Here," Katie said, pointing at an entry. 6 months before the colony was destroyed. Medical supplies, destination New Haven. Payment received from the syndicate, delivery confirmed. Vexthor leaned over her shoulder, his presence warm and solid. Delivery confirmed by whom? Katie opened the attached files. There were signature receipts, timestamps, and even photos of the supplies being unloaded. A woman with short brown hair and a tired smile stood in one photo, giving a thumbs up beside stacks of crates marked with medical symbols. The timestamp showed the date and location clearly. Colony Administrator Helen Brooks confirmed receipt. Katie read from the log. Everything was delivered. My father did the job. So why does the syndicate claim he didn't? Vexthor was very still behind her. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. Either your father falsified. The next morning, Katie found Vexthor waiting outside her workshop when she arrived. He looked exactly the same as the night before, standing perfectly still in a way that suggested he might have been there for hours. The bond mark on her palm tingled slightly when she got close to him, a reminder of their connection that she was still getting used to. "I have made inquiries with the syndicate," Vexthor said without greeting. "They claim to have documentation proving non-delivery, but they are refusing to provide it to me. They say the debt is valid and my job is simply to collect, not to investigate." Katie unlocked her workshop and gestured for him to follow her inside. "That's suspicious, right? If they had proof, they would show it." "Perhaps," Vexthor said, though he sounded uncertain. "Or perhaps they simply do not wish to waste time proving what is already legally established. The burden of proof is on us to show the debt is invalid, not on them to prove it is valid." Katie made coffee using the battered machine in the corner of her workshop. She offered a cup to Vexthor, who examined it curiously before taking a cautious sip. His face contorted in what might have been disgust, and Katie couldn't help but smile. "Not a coffee drinker? This is very bitter," Vexthor said, setting the cup down carefully. "Is this a human preference?" "For some of us," Katie said, taking a long drink of her own coffee. "It helps with long work hours, so if the syndicate won't help us, what do? We go to New Haven," Vexthor said simply. "Or what remains of it. If the colony was destroyed by plague, there will be records, quarantine notices, official reports. We can verify the timeline and look for survivors who might remember your father's delivery." Katie's stomach churned at the thought of visiting a dead colony, but she nodded. "How do we get there?" "I don't have a ship anymore. My father's was impounded when he died and I couldn't afford to reclaim it." "I have a ship," Vexthor said. "It is designed for long-range pursuit and is fast enough to reach New Haven in 3 days. We leave within the hour." Katie looked around her workshop at the half-finished projects and the tools that represented her entire livelihood. Leaving meant losing work, losing income she desperately needed, but staying meant never knowing the truth. She grabbed a bag and started throwing in clothes and supplies. "I need to tell someone I'm leaving," Katie said. "My friend Lucas will worry if I just disappear." "Make it brief," Vexthor said. "Every hour we delay is an hour lost from our 30 days. Katie found Lucas in the station's main workshop, a huge facility where dozens of mechanics worked on ships of all sizes. Lucas was a tall, skinny human with nervous energy and quick hands. He was working on a thruster array when Katie approached, and his face lit up when he saw her. Then he noticed Vexthor standing behind her and the smile vanished. "Katie, what's going on?" Lucas whispered urgently. "Why is there a blood hunter following you? Are you in trouble?" "It's complicated," Katie said quietly. "My father owed money. A lot of money. I'm trying to prove the debt is fake, and Vexthor is helping me investigate. We're leaving the station for a few days." Lucas glanced at Vexthor with obvious fear. "Blood hunters don't help people, Katie. They collect debts. Whatever he's told you, you can't trust him." "I don't have a choice," Katie said. And she showed Lucas the glowing mark on her palm. "We're bound by some kind of alien custom. If I don't do this, I lose everything. Just watch my workshop while I'm gone, okay? Make sure nobody steals my tools." Lucas grabbed her hand, staring at the glowing patterns. "What did you do?" "Something stupid, probably," Katie said with a weak smile. "But it's the only chance I have. I'll be back soon, I promise." Lucas looked like he wanted to argue, but he just pulled her into a quick hug instead. "Be careful. If you need help, send word. I'll figure something out." Katie hugged him back, grateful for the friendship even if he couldn't do anything to help her. Then she turned and followed Vexthor toward the docking levels, leaving Lucas staring after them with worry written all over his face. Vexthor's ship was unlike anything Katie had ever seen. It was sleek and dark with lines that suggested speed and aggression. The hull seemed to absorb light, making it hard to look at directly. Inside, the ship was surprisingly comfortable, with a cockpit designed for Vexthor's 4 arms and a small living area with sleeping quarters and supplies. Everything was efficient and well-maintained, the ship of someone who lived their life in motion. "Strap in," Vexthor said, settling into the pilot's seat. "The acceleration will be significant." Katie found a seat and secured the harness. The ship's engines hummed to life with a sound that made her mechanic's heart happy. This was good engineering, powerful and precise. The station fell away beneath them as Vexthor guided the ship through the departure lanes and out into open space. Then the stars stretched into lines and Katie felt the familiar lurch of a jump drive engaging. For a while, neither of them spoke. Katie watched the swirling colors of jump space through the viewport, trying not to think too hard about what they might find at New Haven. Finally, curiosity got the better of her. "How long have you been a blood hunter?" Katie asked. Vexthor didn't look away from the controls, but his lower right hand gestured in what might have been a shrug. 40 years by your calendar. I was taken into training as a child, as all blood hunters are. We are raised in facilities dedicated to our purpose, taught that debts are sacred because they represent promises made and broken. Order exists only when agreements are honored. Debt collectors maintain that order. That sounds like a lonely childhood, Katie said quietly. Loneliness is a human concept, Vexthor said, but something in his tone suggested he might not entirely believe that. We are trained to be solitary, to rely only on ourselves. Bonds are weakness. Attachment is failure. Only the debt matters. But you accepted the bond right, Katie pointed out. Doesn't that go against everything you were taught? Vexthor was quiet for a long moment. The old laws predate the Commerce Authority by thousands of years. They come from a time when Korath society was different, when hunters were not solitary but worked in pairs or small groups. The bond right was a way for someone to prove they deserved a second chance, an opportunity to turn an enemy into an ally. It has not been invoked in so long that most hunters do not even know it exists. But I studied the old ways. I found them fascinating even if I never expected to use them. Do you wish I hadn't invoked it? Katie asked. Vexthor turned to look at her, his amber eyes thoughtful. I do not know yet. You have complicated what should have been a simple collection. But you have also introduced uncertainty into a life that has been very certain for a very long time. That is not entirely unpleasant. Katie smiled despite herself. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as an observation, Vexthor said, but she thought she detected the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. They traveled in silence for a while longer. Katie found herself studying Vexthor when she thought he wasn't looking. His forearms moved constantly, adjusting controls and checking displays with practiced efficiency. He was dangerous, she had no doubt about that. But he was also oddly honorable, bound by rules and customs that clearly meant something to him. He could have refused the bond right, could have simply taken her by force. Instead, he had chosen to honor an ancient custom that gave her a fighting chance. What happens if we prove the debt is fake? Katie asked eventually. Does it just go away? If the debt is proven fraudulent, it is void under galactic law, Vexthor said. You would be free of all obligation. However, whoever filed the false claim would face severe penalties. The Syndicate does not appreciate being used to settle personal vendettas or cover up crimes. And what happens to you? Vexthor's hands stilled on the controls for just a moment. If I fail to collect a legitimate debt, my reputation suffers. If I expose a fraudulent debt, I am simply doing my job correctly. Blood hunters are meant to maintain order, not perpetuate injustice. However, if the Syndicate is involved in the fraud, they may not appreciate my investigation. So you could get in trouble for helping me, Katie said. Yes, Vexthor said simply, but the bond right compels me and honor demands I see this through. I've never failed to complete a contract. I do not intend to start now, even if the contract has become more complicated than I anticipated. Katie felt a surge of gratitude mixed with guilt. This alien who had come to take her freedom was now risking his own reputation to help her. It made no sense, but she was learning that very little about this situation made sense. She had grabbed his hand on instinct, and now they were bound together, flying toward a dead colony to uncover a truth that someone clearly wanted to stay buried. The bond mark on her palm glowed softly in the dim light of the ship. She pressed her hand against the cool metal of the armrest, feeling Vexthor's presence like a warm current just beneath her awareness. Whatever they found at New Haven, they would face it together. The thought should have terrified her, but instead it gave her strength. She wasn't alone anymore, even if her companion was the last person in the galaxy she should trust. 3 days in jump space gave them time to plan. Vexthor taught Katie how to access quarantine databases and colonial records. Katie showed Vexthor her father's complete shipping logs, pointing out patterns and details that might be relevant. New Haven looked peaceful from orbit, a small green and blue world that could have been any of 1,000 frontier colonies scattered across the galaxy. But as Vexthor brought the ship closer, Katie could see the signs of abandonment. The orbital platform was dark and drifting. No ships moved between the planet and space. No communication signals reached out to identify them or warn them away. The colony was dead, just as the records claimed. The quarantine was declared 3 years ago, Vexthor said, reading from his displays. Official cause listed as hemorrhagic plague, mortality rate 97%. Survivors were evacuated and the colony was sealed. No one has been permitted to return. But we can land? Katie asked, already knowing the answer would be complicated. Technically, no, Vexthor said. However, as a blood hunter, I have override authority for investigation purposes. The quarantine cannot prevent me from accessing potential evidence. But you should remain on the ship. If there is plague, you would be at risk. Katie shook her head. We're bonded. I go where you go. Besides, 3 years is long enough for any plague to die out without hosts. We'll be careful, but I'm not sitting in the ship while you do all the work. Vexthor looked like he wanted to argue, but he simply nodded and began the landing sequence. The ship descended through thin clouds toward what had been the colony's main settlement. Katie could see buildings below, simple structures that housed maybe 2,000 people at the colony's peak. There were farms and greenhouses, a small spaceport, and what looked like a medical facility on the outskirts. They landed in the empty spaceport, the ship's engines stirring up dust that suggested nothing had moved here in a long time. Vexthor ran atmospheric tests before opening the hatch. Air is breathable. No biological contaminants detected. Whatever killed this colony, it is gone now. They stepped out into eerie silence. The settlement looked frozen in time, as if everyone had simply vanished in the middle of their daily routines. A child's toy lay in the street. Laundry still hung on lines between buildings. A cup sat on a porch railing, long since dried out. Katie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. These had been real people with real lives, and now they were all gone. The medical facility, Vexthor said, pointing toward the large building at the settlement's edge. If there are records of what happened, they will be there. They walked through the empty streets, their footsteps echoing off silent buildings. Katie kept expecting to see movement, to hear voices, but there was nothing. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb this place. When they reached the medical facility, Vexthor forced open the sealed doors with 2 of his forearms, the metal groaning in protest. Inside, the facility was dark until Vexthor activated portable lights. Examination rooms stood empty, their equipment gathering dust. A reception area still had patient files scattered across the desk. Katie picked one up and read about a farmer named Paul who had come in complaining of a cough. The date was 3 years ago, just days before the quarantine was declared. She set the file down carefully, feeling like she was disturbing a grave. Here, Vexthor called from deeper in the facility. Katie found him in what looked like an administrator's office. He was accessing a computer terminal, his fingers moving across the controls with surprising delicacy. The colony kept detailed medical records. I am downloading everything. Katie looked around the office while Vexthor worked. There were photos on the wall, groups of smiling people celebrating the colony's founding. She recognized the woman from her father's logs, Helen Brooks, standing in the center of one photo with her arm around a man who might have been her husband. They looked happy and hopeful, ready to build a new life far from Earth's overcrowded cities. Now they were almost certainly dead. This is wrong, Vexthor said suddenly, and his tone made Katie turn around. What's wrong? The medical records, Vexthor said, gesturing at the screen. They end abruptly 6 months before the quarantine was declared. The last entry is a routine checkup for a pregnant woman. Then nothing. No reports of illness, no emergency admissions, no plague symptoms at all. Then suddenly, 6 months later, the colony is reporting 97% mortality and requesting evacuation. Katie moved to look over his shoulder at the screen. He was right. The records just stopped, as if someone had decided to stop keeping them. Maybe they were too busy dealing with the plague to keep records. Impossible, Vexthor said. Medical facilities have automated systems that record everything. Even if the doctors were overwhelmed, the computers would continue logging data. This is not an absence of records due to chaos. This is a deliberate cessation of record keeping. Or someone deleted the records, Katie said, her heart starting to pound. Someone who didn't want anyone to know what really happened here. Vexthor began typing rapidly, his multiple hands allowing him to access several systems at once. I am checking communication logs, supply records, anything that might tell us what happened during those 6 months. Katie moved to another terminal and started her own search. She pulled up the colony's shipping records looking for her father's delivery. There it was, exactly as his logs had shown. Medical supplies delivered, signed for by Helen Brooks, everything official and proper. But then she noticed something else. "Vexthor, look at this," Katie said. "My father's delivery was the last shipment this colony received. After that, nothing. No supply runs, no communications with traders, no request for additional resources. For 6 months, this colony existed in complete isolation." "That makes no sense," Vexthor said, moving to stand beside her. "Frontier colonies require regular supply runs. They cannot produce everything they need locally. 6 months without supplies would cause serious hardship." "Unless they were told to stay isolated," Katie said. "Or unless someone wanted them isolated." Vexthor's amber eyes narrowed. "We need to find survivors. The records say some were evacuated. If we can locate them, they can tell us what really happened." They spent another hour searching the facility, but found nothing else useful. The colony's final days remained a mystery, hidden behind deleted records and suspicious silence. As they were leaving, Katie noticed something that made her stop. There was a quarantine seal on the facility's main door, an official stamp from the Galactic Health Authority. But the seal was dated 6 months before the medical records ended, not after the plague was supposedly discovered. "That's impossible," Katie said, pointing at the seal. "This says the quarantine was established a full year before the plague was reported. How can you quarantine a colony for a disease that hasn't appeared yet?" Vexthor examined the seal carefully. Either this date is an error, or someone knew this colony was going to die long before it actually did. They returned to the ship in silence, both of them processing what they had found. Once aboard, Vexthor began searching for the evacuated survivors while Katie made food neither of them felt like eating. The bond mark on her palm was glowing brighter than usual, as if responding to her agitation. She could feel Vexthor's presence more strongly now, a sense of focused intensity that matched her own. "I have located 3 survivors," Vexthor said finally. "They were processed through a refugee facility on a station called Crossroads. 2 have since moved to other colonies, but 1 remains at the facility, a woman named Margaret Chen. According to the records, she was one of the last to be evacuated." "How far is Crossroads from here?" Katie asked. 2 days at maximum speed," Vexthor said. "We have 23 days remaining on our bond right. Time enough if we are efficient." They jumped back into faster-than-light travel, leaving the dead colony behind. Katie found it hard to sleep that night, her mind racing with questions. Why would someone fake a plague? Why isolate the colony for 6 months before killing everyone? And what did any of this have to do with her father's delivery of medical supplies? She found Vexthor in the cockpit, watching the swirling colors of jump space. He didn't sleep much, she had learned. Maybe blood hunters didn't need as much rest as humans, or maybe he just preferred to stay alert. She sat down in the co-pilot's seat without asking permission, and he didn't object. "Tell me about the syndicate," Katie said. "Who are they, really?" Vexthor was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to tell her. The syndicate began as a legitimate trading consortium, connecting colonies and facilitating commerce across dozens of systems. Over time, they grew powerful enough to operate outside normal legal frameworks. They handle contracts that other organizations will not touch, supply goods that cannot be obtained through official channels, and enforce agreements that governments prefer to ignore. They are not entirely criminal, but they are not entirely legal either. They exist in the gray spaces of galactic society. "And you work for them," Katie said. "I work for whoever pays the Commerce Authority to authorize a debt collection," Vexthor said. "Sometimes that is the syndicate. Sometimes it is legitimate corporations or governments. A debt is a debt, regardless of who files the claim. Or so I believed." Katie heard the uncertainty in his voice. "You're starting to doubt that?" "I have never investigated the origins of a debt before," Vexthor admitted. "I simply verified that the paperwork was legal and then collected. But this debt is strange. The timing is suspicious. Crossroads Station was massive compared to Meridian 7, a hub where dozens of trade routes intersected and hundreds of ships docked daily. The refugee facility occupied an entire section of the lower levels, a place where displaced people waited for new colony assignments or passage to established worlds. It was crowded and noisy. filled with the sounds of dozens of languages and the smell of too many beings living in too little space. Katie and Vexthor drew stares as they made their way through the crowds. A blood hunter and a human woman walking side by side was unusual enough, but the glowing marks on their palms made people whisper and point. Katie tried to ignore the attention and focused on following Vexthor's lead as he navigated the facility's corridors. Margaret Chen lived in a small apartment in the refugee housing block. She was a thin woman in her 60s with gray hair and tired eyes. When she opened the door and saw Vexthor, fear flashed across her face. Katie quickly stepped forward, trying to appear non-threatening. "Mrs. Chen, my name is Katie Morrison. This is Vexthor. We're investigating what happened at New Haven. We need to ask you some questions about the colony." Margaret's face went pale. "I don't talk about New Haven, I can't." "Please," Katie said. "My father delivered medical supplies to your colony 3 years ago. His name was Daniel Morrison. Do you remember him?" Recognition flickered in Margaret's eyes, followed by something that looked like grief. "Danny, yes, I remember Danny. He was kind. He always brought extra supplies. Things we couldn't afford to order officially. Chocolate for the children. Books, seeds for the gardens. We loved seeing his ship arrive." "He died shortly after your colony was destroyed," Katie said gently. "And now someone is claiming he never delivered the supplies he was paid for. I'm trying to prove that's a lie, but I need to know what really happened at New Haven." Margaret looked between Katie and Vexthor, her hands trembling. "If I talk to you, they'll kill me. They've already killed everyone else who knew." Vexthor stepped forward, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Mrs. Chen, I am a blood hunter. No one can harm you while you are under my protection. Whatever you tell us will be kept confidential until we have enough evidence to act. I swear this on my honor as a hunter." Margaret stared at him for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. She stepped back and gestured for them to enter. The apartment was tiny but clean, decorated with photos of people who were probably dead now. Margaret sat heavily on a worn couch and gestured for them to sit as well. "New Haven wasn't destroyed by plague," Margaret said quietly. "It was murdered." Katie felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "About 3 years ago, a man came to our colony," Margaret began, her voice shaking slightly. "His name was Gregor Stone, and he represented the syndicate. He said we were in violation of our shipping contracts because we had been buying supplies from independent traders like your father, instead of using official syndicate carriers. He said we owed penalties and fees totaling millions of credits. But independent trading isn't illegal," Katie said. "Colonies can buy from whoever they want." "That's what Helen Brooks told him," Margaret said. "She was our administrator, and she stood up to Stone. She showed him our budget, explained that we couldn't afford syndicate prices, that independent traders like your father were our lifeline. Stone said it didn't matter. He said the syndicate controlled all shipping in this sector, and anyone who didn't use their services was stealing their business." Vexthor leaned forward, his amber eyes intense. "What happened then?" "Stone gave us 30 days to pay the fees or accept syndicate control of all colony operations," Margaret said. Helen refused. She said we were an independent colony, and no corporation could force us to use their services. Stone left, but he promised we would regret our decision. Katie's hands clenched into fists. "He quarantined you?" Margaret nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. 2 weeks later, official quarantine notices appeared. We were declared a plague risk, and all shipping was forbidden. No one could land, no one could leave. We tried to protest, to contact the authorities, but all our communications were blocked. Your father tried to reach us. We saw his ship in orbit, but he couldn't land. The quarantine forces turned him away. But there was no plague, Vexthor said. Not at first, Margaret said. For 6 months we lived in isolation. We rationed our supplies, grew what food we could, tried to survive. Helen kept fighting, kept trying to get word out about what was really happening. Then the supplies arrived. What supplies? Katie asked, though she was starting to understand. Medical supplies, Margaret said bitterly. Crates and crates of them, delivered by syndicate ships that somehow weren't concerned about the quarantine. Helen was suspicious, but people were getting sick from malnutrition and stress. We needed medicine, so we accepted the delivery. Katie felt sick. The supplies were contaminated. We didn't know until it was too late, Margaret said, tears now flowing freely. People started getting sick within days. High fever, internal bleeding, organ failure. It spread so fast. The doctors couldn't stop it. Helen realized what had happened and tried to warn people, tried to get everyone to stop using the medicine, but it was everywhere by then. In the water, in the food, in the air we breathed. Within 2 weeks, almost everyone was dead or dying. Vexthor's 4 hands were clenched into fists, his whole body rigid with controlled rage. Katie had never seen him show such emotion. They poisoned an entire colony because you refused to pay extortion fees. Helen managed to get a message out before she died, Margaret continued. She recorded everything, sent it to every authority she could think of. But Stone had covered his tracks. The official records show we requested the medical supplies because of a plague outbreak. The quarantine was legitimate. The deaths were a tragedy, not a crime, and anyone who knew the truth died with the colony. But you survived, Katie said. I was off-world when the poison supplies arrived, Margaret said. I had taken my grandson to a hospital on another station for surgery. By the time I tried to return, the colony was dead and the evacuation had begun. They almost didn't let me leave the station. I think Stone wanted me dead too, but there were too many witnesses. So they let me go, but they made it clear that if I ever talked about what really happened, I would have an accident just like everyone else who knew the truth. Katie pulled out her tablet and showed Margaret the photos from her father's logs. My father delivered supplies 6 months before the poisoning. These were legitimate medical supplies, signed for by Helen Brooks. The syndicate is now claiming he never delivered them, that he stole the money. They're using a fake debt to destroy his reputation and trap me. Margaret looked at the photos and fresh tears came to her eyes. That's Helen. She was so grateful for those supplies. She said Danny had saved lives. The medicine treated infections that were spreading through the children's ward. He was a hero to us. But if my father delivered legitimate supplies and the syndicate later delivered poison supplies, then the debt contract must be fake, Katie said, her mind racing. Stone created a false debt to discredit my father and cover up the murder of New Haven. Vexthor stood abruptly, his height making the small apartment feel even smaller. This is beyond debt fraud. This is mass murder and conspiracy. If Stone has the power to quarantine entire colonies and falsify Commerce Authority records, he has connections at the highest levels of both the syndicate and the government. That's why I've been hiding, Margaret said. That's why I've been too afraid to speak. Stone has people everywhere. He's not just one corrupt official. He's part of a network that's been using the debt collection system to silence anyone who threatens syndicate control. Katie felt her anger growing, hot and fierce. Her father had been murdered, his reputation destroyed, and she had nearly been enslaved, all to cover up the mass murder of innocent people. The injustice of it made her want to scream. But screaming wouldn't help. They needed evidence, real proof that couldn't be ignored or buried. Do you have any proof of what you've told us? Vexthor asked. Records, messages, anything that could corroborate your testimony? Helen's message, Margaret said. She sent it to me as a backup in case the other copies were destroyed. I've been carrying it for 3 years, too afraid to use it but unable to delete it. It's everything. Her testimony, medical records, proof that the supplies were poisoned, everything you need to expose Stone. She pulled out a small data chip from a hidden pocket in her jacket and held it out with a shaking hand. Katie took it carefully as if it might explode. This tiny piece of technology represented justice for an entire colony, for her father, for everyone Stone had hurt. It was also incredibly dangerous. The moment they used it, they would become targets. We need to get you somewhere safe, Katie said to Margaret. If we're going to use this evidence, Stone will know you talked to us. He'll come after you. I'm already dead if he finds me, Margaret said quietly. But if you can stop him, if you can make sure Helen and everyone else didn't die for nothing, then at least my death will mean something. Vexthor's voice was cold and hard when he spoke. No one else dies. I swear this on my honor. Mrs. Chen, you are now under my protection as a key witness in a criminal investigation. Anyone who attempts to harm you will answer. Stone's primary facility was on a corporate world called Prosperity, a planet owned and operated by the Syndicate, where laws were suggestions and money bought everything, including silence. The facility itself was a fortress disguised as an office building, with security that would make a military installation jealous. Vexthor studied the building's schematics for hours, planning their approach with the same meticulous care he had once used to track debtors across star systems. We cannot simply walk in, Vexthor said, highlighting security checkpoints on the holographic display. Stone will have been alerted to our investigation by now. Margaret's protective custody filing would have triggered notifications. He knows someone is coming for him. Katie studied the building layout, her mechanic's mind seeing possibilities that Vexthor might miss. What if we don't go in through the front door? Every building has maintenance systems, air circulation, power conduits, places where security is lighter because nobody expects an attack from those vectors. You want to crawl through air ducts, Vexthor said, sounding skeptical. I want to use the infrastructure against them, Katie corrected. Big fancy buildings always have the same weakness. They're designed to look impressive and keep people out of the important areas. But somebody still has to maintain all the systems that keep the building running. That means access points, service corridors, areas where a good mechanic could move around almost invisibly. Vexthor considered this, his amber eyes thoughtful. It is unconventional, but that may work in our favor. Stone will expect a direct assault or a legal challenge, not infiltration through maintenance areas. However, we will need help. You cannot carry all the equipment we need, and I am too large for many of the access points you describe. Katie pulled out her communication device and hesitated for only a moment before calling Lucas. Her friend answered immediately, his face appearing on the small screen with obvious relief. Katie, thank the stars. I've been worried sick. Where are you? Lucas, I need your help, Katie said quickly. I need you to come to Prosperity, and I need you to bring your complete toolkit. Everything you've got. Lucas's expression shifted from relief to concern. What are you planning? Something probably stupid and definitely dangerous, Katie admitted. We're going to break into a syndicate facility and steal evidence that will clear my father's name and expose a murderer. Are you in? Lucas was quiet for a moment, then he laughed, though it sounded a bit hysterical. You know what? I've been working on the same boring ships for 2 years. I could use some excitement. Give me 2 days to get there. Thank you, Katie said, feeling a surge of gratitude for her friend's loyalty. And Lucas? Be careful. The people we're going after don't hesitate to kill. Great, Lucas said. That makes me feel so much better. See you soon. The connection ended, and Katie turned to find Vexthor watching her with something that might have been approval. Your friend is loyal. That is rare. Humans are good at loyalty, Katie said. We form bonds and we keep them. Sometimes even when it's not smart to do so. Like invoking bond right with a blood hunter, Vexthor said, and there was definitely amusement in his voice now. Katie grinned. Exactly like that. Lucas arrived 2 days later looking nervous but determined. He was carrying 2 large cases of tools and equipment, everything from plasma cutters to electronic lockpicks. He stared at Vexthor with obvious fear, but he shook the blood hunter's hand when introduced, which Vexthor seemed to respect. They spent the next day planning. Katie and Lucas worked out the route through the building's maintenance systems, identifying access points and security gaps. Vexthor used his blood hunter credentials to gather intelligence on Stone's security forces and current location. They learned that Stone rarely left the facility, paranoid about assassination attempts from rivals and enemies he had made over the years. That paranoia would make him harder to reach, but also meant he was definitely there. The night they chose for the infiltration was during a scheduled maintenance window, when security would be expecting technicians to be moving through service areas. Katie and Lucas wore maintenance uniforms they had purchased from a bribed syndicate employee. Vexthor wore his usual dark armor but carried forged maintenance authorization codes that would explain his presence if challenged. They entered through a service entrance on the building's lower level, Katie's forged credentials getting them past the first checkpoint. Inside, the building was a maze of corridors and rooms, all monitored by security cameras and patrolled by armed guards. But the maintenance areas were different. Dimly lit passages filled with pipes and conduits where the building's guts were exposed. Katie led them through narrow crawl spaces and along catwalks suspended over humming machinery. Lucas followed close behind, his tool cases making soft clanking sounds that seemed too loud in the confined spaces. Vexthor brought up the rear, moving with surprising silence despite his size. The bond mark on Katie's palm glowed steadily, a reminder that she and Vexthor were connected, that they were in this together. They reached the data center after an hour of careful movement, emerging from an air vent into a room filled with servers and cooling systems. This was where the syndicate kept its records. Everything from shipping manifests to financial transactions to, Katie hoped, the evidence of Stone's crimes. But the room was locked down tight with biometric scanners and encryption that would take days to crack. I cannot override these systems, Vexthor admitted, studying the security console. They require Stone's personal authorization. Then we need Stone, Katie said. Can you track him in the building? Vexthor accessed the security network through his Bloodhunter codes, pulling up internal monitoring. He is in his office 3 floors above us. We would need to capture him without alerting security, bring him here and force him to open the system. That's impossible, Lucas said, looking pale. This whole thing is impossible. We're going to get caught and killed. Humans do impossible things all the time, Katie said, putting a hand on Lucas's shoulder. We're improvisers. We figure it out as we go. That's what makes us dangerous. Vexthor was staring at Katie, and she could feel something through the bond mark, something that felt like respect mixed with something warmer. You are right. Humans do not accept limitations the way other species do. You see barriers and immediately begin planning how to go around them. It is both frustrating and admirable. I'll take that as a compliment, Katie said. Now let's go get Stone. Lucas, you stay here and start prepping the data extraction. Once we get Stone to open the system, I need you to copy everything as fast as possible. We won't have much time. Lucas nodded, looking terrified but determined. Katie and Vexthor left him in the data center and began making their way toward Stone's office. The upper floors were more heavily guarded, with patrols moving through the corridors at regular intervals. They had to hide twice, pressed into shadowy alcoves while armed guards walked past close enough to touch. Stone's office was at the end of a long hallway, behind a door that required both a keycard and a retinal scan. Katie could see through a window that Stone was inside, sitting at his desk and working on a computer terminal. He was a fat man in expensive clothes, his face red and sweating despite the climate control. He looked exactly like what he was, a bureaucrat who had grown rich from other people's suffering. We need a distraction, Katie whispered, something that will get him to open the door without alerting everyone in the building. Vexthor thought for a moment, then pulled out his communication device. I will call him. As a Bloodhunter, he will be curious about why I am contacting him. When he opens the door to investigate, we take him. It was simple and direct, which seemed to be Vexthor's style. He placed the call, and through the window, Katie saw Stone's terminal light up with an incoming message. Stone looked annoyed but curious. He stood and walked to the door, and Katie's heart began to race. This was the moment. If this didn't work, they were trapped with no way out. The door slid open, and Stone stepped into the hallway, looking around for whoever had called him. He never saw Vexthor coming. The Bloodhunter moved with incredible speed, one hand covering Stone's mouth while another grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back. Katie pulled a sedative injector from her pocket and pressed it against Stone's neck. The man's eyes went wide with fear and recognition before the drugs took effect, and he went limp. They dragged Stone's unconscious body back through the maintenance corridors, moving as quickly as they dared. Katie kept expecting alarms to sound, for security to come pouring out of every doorway, but nothing happened. They reached the data center and found Lucas pacing nervously, his relief visible when he saw them. You actually got him, Lucas said in disbelief. I didn't think you could actually do it. Never doubt human stubbornness, Katie said, propping Stone up in front of the security console. She slapped his face lightly until he started to wake up, his eyes unfocused and confused. When he saw Vexthor looming over him, fear cut through the drug haze. Who are you? Stone slurred. What do you want? I am Vexthor, Bloodhunter, Vexthor said in a voice like frozen iron. You are Gregor Stone, murderer and fraud. You will open this system and provide access to your files. The Hunting Council's investigation took 3 weeks, during which Katie, Vexthor, and Lucas gave testimony about everything they had discovered. The council was thorough and surprisingly fair, acknowledging that the debt collection system had been corrupted and that reforms were necessary. They officially cleared Vexthor of oath-breaking and issued a public statement praising his integrity and exposing the conspiracy. It was unprecedented, and it sent shockwaves through the Bloodhunter community. Stone was convicted of mass murder, fraud, and conspiracy. His sentence was life imprisonment in a maximum security facility, where his money and connections couldn't reach. Several other high-ranking syndicate officials were also arrested, and the organization's power began to crumble as governments across the galaxy imposed new regulations and oversight. It wasn't enough to destroy the syndicate entirely, but it was a start. Katie's father's debt was officially declared void, his reputation restored posthumously. The Commerce Authority issued a formal apology for the fraudulent claim and established a fund to compensate other victims of similar fraud. It was small comfort for all the damage that had been done, but it meant Daniel Morrison would be remembered as a hero who died fighting corruption, not as a thief who cheated his clients. Margaret Chen sent Katie a message, thanking her for keeping her promise and making sure Helen Brooks and New Haven were not forgotten. Several colonies had already established memorials for the murdered settlement, and historians were documenting what had really happened there. The truth had won, at least this time. When the investigation finally concluded, Katie found herself back on Meridian 7 with Vexthor and Lucas, standing in her workshop and wondering what came next. The debt that had brought Vexthor into her life was gone, declared fraudulent and void. The bond right had been completed successfully. Technically, there was nothing keeping them together anymore, except for the bond mark that still glowed on both their palms, brighter than ever. "So what now?" Lucas asked, breaking the thoughtful silence. "You two are famous across the galaxy as the human and the blood hunter who took down the syndicate's corruption. Job offers have been pouring in. The Commerce Authority wants to hire you as investigators. 3 different colonies want you to review their debt contracts. Even the Hunting Council wants Vexthor to train other hunters in proper investigative techniques." Katie looked at Vexthor, trying to gauge his thoughts. The bond mark let her sense his presence and sometimes his emotions, but he was still learning to be open about what he wanted. For 40 years he had been told what to do, where to go, who to hunt. Now he had choices, and she knew that was both liberating and terrifying. "What do you want to do?" Katie asked him directly. Vexthor was quiet for a moment, his 4 hands moving in that contemplative way he had when he was thinking deeply. "For my entire life I believed I was maintaining order by collecting debts. Now I know that order is more complicated than I thought. Laws can be unjust. Debts can be false. The system I served was corrupted, and I was too blind to see it until you showed me." He moved closer to Katie, and she could feel the warmth of his presence through the bond. "You gave me purpose beyond simple collection. You showed me that justice and honor require thought and courage, not just obedience. I do not wish to return to what I was, but I do not know what else I can be." Katie felt her heart ache for him. Vexthor had lost everything he thought he knew about himself, and now he was adrift, trying to find a new identity in a galaxy that would always see him as a blood hunter first. But she also saw an opportunity, a chance to create something new and important. "What if we kept doing what we just did?" Katie said, the idea forming as she spoke. "There are probably hundreds of people trapped by fraudulent debts right now, people who can't fight back because they don't have the resources or the knowledge. What if we helped them? We could investigate suspicious debts, expose corruption, and make sure the collection system is used for justice instead of oppression." Lucas perked up. "You mean like freelance debt investigators? That's actually brilliant. You'd have Vexthor's blood hunter access and authority, Katie's technical skills and human intuition, and my ability to break into systems and gather evidence. We could be a team." Vexthor's amber eyes lit up with something that looked like hope. "A team. Partners working together for a common purpose. This is appealing. But we would be making powerful enemies. The syndicate is weakened, but not destroyed. Other corrupt organizations would see us as threats. It would be dangerous." "Everything worth doing is dangerous," Katie said. She held up her glowing palm. "Besides, we're life bonded now, right? Kethril said this connection is permanent. We're stuck with each other whether we like it or not. Might as well make the most of it." "I would not say we are stuck," Vexthor said, and there was warmth in his voice that made Katie's heart skip. "I would say we are fortunate. In 40 years I never found anything worth keeping besides my duty. Now I have found a partner who challenges me, teaches me, and makes me want to be better than I was trained to be. That is not something I wish to lose." Katie felt her eyes getting hot, tears threatening to fall. She had been so angry when Vexthor first appeared in her workshop, so terrified of losing everything. Now she couldn't imagine her life without him. He had become her anchor, her partner, her friend. Maybe even something more, though that was complicated territory she wasn't ready to explore yet. Then we do this together, Katie said firmly. We help people who are trapped like I was. We make sure debt collectors are used properly, not as weapons against the innocent. We call it the Morrison Protocol after my father. He died fighting this corruption. We'll make sure his fight continues. Lucas grinned. The Morrison Protocol. I like it. Has a nice ring to it. When do we start? As soon as we get our first case, Katie said. She pulled out her tablet and began setting up a communication channel, a way for people to reach them with requests for help. Within minutes of going live, messages started coming in. Dozens of them, then hundreds, people who had seen the news, broadcasts, and were desperate for help with their own debt situations. Katie felt overwhelmed by the response, but Vexthor placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. We cannot help everyone immediately, he said. But we can start with one case, then another, then another. Over time, we will make a difference. That is how change happens. One decision at a time. One person saved at a time. They reviewed the incoming messages together, looking for cases where fraud was likely and where their intervention could make a real difference. They found one quickly, a small farming colony that had been threatened with debt seizure after a crop failure that seemed suspiciously timed. The colony administrator claimed the seeds they had been sold were deliberately sabotaged, but they couldn't prove it. It was exactly the kind of case they were looking for. This one, Katie said, highlighting the message. A colony called Hope's Landing. They need us. Then we go, Vexthor said simply. He began preparing the ship for departure while Lucas gathered equipment and Katie downloaded all available information about the colony and the debt claim. As they worked, Katie felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what she was meant to do, not just fix ships but fix lives. She had spent 2 years hiding from her father's legacy, trying to pretend his death hadn't left a gaping hole in her world. Now she was honoring that legacy by continuing his fight in a new way. Daniel Morrison had helped colonies by bringing them supplies they needed. Katie Morrison would help them by protecting them from those who would exploit their desperation. The ship lifted off from Meridian 7, and Katie watched her workshop disappear below. She would return eventually, but that place was no longer her whole world. Her world had expanded to include Vexthor and Lucas, to include a mission that mattered, and a future that felt full of possibility rather than just survival. In the cockpit, Vexthor was piloting with his usual skill, while Lucas nervously checked their equipment for the 3rd time. Katie sat in the co-pilot seat and felt the bond mark pulse warmly on her palm. She reached out and placed her hand on Vexthor's lower right arm, the gesture now familiar and comfortable. Thank you, Katie said quietly, for choosing to honor the bond right, for investigating when you could have just collected, for teaching me that even the most feared beings in the galaxy can choose compassion over cruelty. Vexthor covered her hand with one of his upper hands, the touch gentle. I should thank you. You invoked an ancient custom you did not understand and changed the course of my entire life. You showed me that duty without wisdom is just slavery with a prettier name. You made me question everything I believed, and in doing so, you freed me from a cage I did not know I was in. So we saved each other, Katie said with a smile. Yes, Vexthor agreed. We saved each other, and now we will save others, for as long as the bond mark glows and the stars burn. This is my oath to you, Katie Morrison. Not as a blood hunter, collecting a debt, but as a partner who chooses to stand beside you freely. Katie felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were good tears, the kind that came from happiness and hope rather than grief and fear. She squeezed Vexthor's arm and looked out at the stars stretching before them. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the files they had broadcast were being discussed on every major news network across dozens of systems. Governments were opening investigations. The Commerce Authority announced emergency reviews of all debt contracts filed by Stone and his associates. The syndicate's stock value plummeted as investors fled an organization now exposed as murderous and corrupt. Stone himself was arrested by local authorities on prosperity, though Katie suspected his powerful friends would try to make the charges disappear. But public outrage was too strong to suppress. People who had lost loved ones to suspicious syndicate activities came forward with their own stories. Colonies that had been extorted shared their experiences. A dozen similar conspiracies began to unravel as investigators dug deeper into syndicate operations. What Katie and Vexthor had started was becoming a galaxy-wide reckoning. However, not everyone was pleased with their actions. 3 days after the broadcast, as they were hiding on a remote station and monitoring news feeds, Vexthor received an official communication from the Korath Hunting Council. His face went carefully blank as he read the message, but Katie could feel his distress through the bond mark. "What is it?" Katie asked, moving to stand beside him. "The Hunting Council has declared me oath-broken," Vexthor said quietly. "I abandoned my contract to collect your debt. I attacked a client without authorization and I stole private property. They are sending 3 blood hunters to bring me to trial. The penalty for oath-breaking is execution." Katie felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "But you were investigating a fraudulent debt. You were doing the right thing." "The Hunting Council does not recognize the right thing as a valid defense," Vexthor said. "They recognize only the completion or failure of contracts. I failed to collect your debt. Therefore, I am oath-broken. The fact that the debt was fraudulent is irrelevant under their laws." "That's insane," Katie said angrily. "You can't be punished for refusing to participate in a crime." "I can and I will be," Vexthor said. He stood and began checking his weapons with calm efficiency, as if preparing for an execution was just another task to complete. "The hunters they are sending are among the best. I will not be able to defeat all 3. When they arrive, you and Lucas should leave. There is no reason for you to die with me." "Absolutely not," Katie said, grabbing his arm and forcing him to look at her. "We're bonded. We're partners. I'm not leaving you to face this alone." "The bond right will end when I die," Vexthor said. "You will be free of all connection to me and safe from the Hunting Council's judgment." "I don't want to be free of you," Katie said, the words coming out more forcefully than she intended. "You saved me, Vexthor, not just from the debt but from giving up on ever finding the truth about my father. You chose justice over your duty, honor over your orders. If the Hunting Council can't see that, then they're wrong, and we need to make them understand." Vexthor stared at her, his amber eyes filled with something Katie couldn't quite name. "You would fight for me, even knowing it is hopeless." "Humans don't accept hopeless," Katie said. "We fight anyway, and I'm not letting them kill you without a fight." Lucas appeared in the doorway, looking worried. "The hunters are here. 3 ships just docked at the station. Security is clearing the area around our berth." Katie's mind raced. They couldn't fight 3 blood hunters and win, not directly. But maybe they didn't have to fight. Maybe they could do what humans did best and find another way. She pulled out her tablet and started recording. "What are you doing?" Vexthor asked. "Making a case," Katie said. "You were punished for doing the right thing. Let's make sure the entire galaxy knows it." She spoke quickly and passionately into the camera, explaining the bond right, the investigation, the crimes they had uncovered. She talked about Vexthor's choice to honor justice over blind obedience, his courage in facing the truth even when it cost him everything. She described the bond mark, the connection between them, and how a human and a Korath had become partners against corruption. When she finished, she broadcast the message using the same distribution system they had used for Stone's files. "That will not stop them," Vexthor said, but he sounded less certain. "Maybe not," Katie admitted, "but at least people will know why you did what you did. They'll know you're a hero, not a criminal." The 3 blood hunters arrived minutes later, entering the ship without permission or announcement. They were all Korath, each as imposing as Vexthor, but somehow colder, more mechanical. The leader was a female with silver-blue skin and scars that suggested centuries of battles. Her amber eyes swept over Katie and Lucas with contempt, before focusing on Vexthor. "Vexthor of the Hunters line," she said formally. "I am Kethril, First Blade of the Hunting Council. You stand accused of oath-breaking. How do you answer?" "Guilty," Vexthor said simply. "I abandoned a contract because the debt was fraudulent, and continuing to pursue it would have made me complicit in murder and conspiracy. I chose honor over duty." "Honor is duty," Kethril said coldly. "A blood hunter who questions his contracts is a blood hunter who has lost his purpose. You will return with us for judgment and execution." Katie stepped between them, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "He fulfilled the bond right. Under your own ancient laws, he investigated the debt and discovered it was false. The bond right was completed successfully. The debt is void and Vexthor's honor is intact. Kethral's gaze shifted to Katie and the contempt deepened. A human speaks of Korath honor. How amusing. The bond right requires successful completion of the task. Vexthor did not complete the task. He instead destroyed evidence, attacked the debt holder, and stole property. These are not the actions of an honorable hunter. He exposed a conspiracy that has corrupted your entire profession, Katie shot back. How many other blood hunters are being used to enforce fraudulent debts right now? How many are collecting payments for crimes instead of legitimate contracts? Vexthor didn't break his oath. He saved it from being twisted into something evil. You do not understand our ways, Kethral said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her voice. Maybe I don't, Katie agreed, but I understand justice. I understand that following orders doesn't make you honorable if the orders are wrong. Vexthor taught me that debts are sacred because they represent promises. But what kind of promise is a lie? What kind of debt is built on murder? One of the other hunters spoke for the first time. A male with dark purple skin and thoughtful eyes. The human makes a valid point. If the debt was fraudulent, then pursuing it would have violated the greater purpose of our duty. We maintain order by ensuring agreements are honored, but false agreements create disorder, not prevent it. The council's judgment is clear, Kethral said, but she sounded less certain now. Vexthor attacked a client. Vexthor stopped a murderer, Katie corrected. Stone killed 2,000 people and was using fake debts to silence anyone who knew the truth. If that's a client you want to protect, then your whole system is broken. Kethral pulled out a data tablet and began reviewing something. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, she looked up, her amber eyes meeting Vexthor's. I have reviewed the evidence you broadcast, Kethral said. The files show clear fraud, conspiracy, and mass murder. The debt against Katie Morrison was created after her father's death, as a tool of intimidation and control. Under these circumstances, continuing to pursue the debt would have been a violation of our true purpose. She paused, and something that might have been respect entered her expression. You did what a blood hunter is supposed to do. You maintained order by exposing chaos. You honored the spirit of our oaths, even if you violated the letter of our contracts. Katie felt hope surge through her. So he's not oath-broken? He is still technically in violation of his contract, Kethral said. However, the contract itself was invalid. The Hunting Council will review his case and likely rule that his actions were justified under the circumstances. He will be censured for his methods but not executed. That is more than I expected, Vexthor said quietly. Thank you, First Blade. Kethral shook her head slowly. Do not thank me. Thank the human who stood between you and death with nothing but words and courage. She reminded me of something I had forgotten. We are not mindless collectors. We are keepers of order. And sometimes order requires us to question the contracts we are given. She turned to Katie, studying her with new interest. You invoked bond right and changed the path of a blood hunter. That has not happened in over 300 years. The bond mark still glows on both your palms, which means the bond has deepened beyond the traditional 30 days. Do you understand what that means? Katie looked at Vexthor, seeing something vulnerable in his expression for the first time. No, what does it mean? It means the bond has become permanent, Kethral said. In ancient times, such bonds were considered sacred, a connection deeper than family or clan. You are life-bonded now, connected until one of you dies. It cannot be broken or dissolved. You are partners in the truest sense. Katie should have felt trapped by this revelation, but instead she felt a strange sense of rightness. She had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of her father's death and her uncertain future by herself. Katie Morrison wiped the grease from her hands onto her already dirty work pants and stepped back to admire her handiwork. The freighter's engine hummed smoothly now, no longer making that terrible grinding noise that had brought its captain to her workshop 3 days ago. She smiled to herself, knowing she had done good work. The payment would keep her fed for another 2 weeks, maybe 3 if she was careful. Life on Meridian 7 was never easy, but Katie had learned to survive in the 5 years since she left Earth. The frontier station was home to traders, smugglers, and people running from their pasts. She fit right in, though she tried to keep her head down and her business clean. Her workshop was small, crammed into a corner of the station's industrial sector where rent was cheap and questions were few. Tools hung on every available wall space, and the floor was stained with years of oil and hydraulic fluid from dozens of ships. A narrow staircase led up to her apartment, which was really just a converted storage loft with a bed, a tiny kitchen, and a shower that only worked half the time. But it was hers, and that mattered more than comfort. Katie grabbed her payment tablet and sent the invoice to the freighter captain. Within seconds, the credits transferred to her account, and she allowed herself a moment of relief. 3,200 credits total now. Not much, but it was honest money earned with her own skills. Her father had taught her everything about engines and ships before he died, though she tried not to think about him too often. Daniel Morrison had been a complicated man, charming and reckless in equal measure. His death 2 years ago in what officials called a shipping accident had left her alone in the galaxy, but at least it had also left her free. The workshop door slid open with a hiss, and Katie looked up expecting to see another customer. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. The figure that entered had to duck to fit through the doorway, and even then, the ceiling seemed too low. Katie had seen plenty of aliens in her time on the station, but nothing had prepared her for this. The creature stood over 7 feet tall with skin the color of midnight blue, smooth and almost metallic in the harsh workshop lights. 4 arms moved with fluid grace, 2 on each side of a powerful torso that suggested incredible strength. The face was vaguely humanoid but sharper, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. But it was the eyes that made Katie's heart race. They glowed with an amber light, fixed directly on her with an intensity that made her feel like prey. The being wore dark armor that seemed to absorb light, decorated with symbols Katie didn't recognize. A long coat hung from broad shoulders, and various weapons were visible at its belt and thighs. This was not a customer. This was something far more dangerous. Katie Morrison, the being said, and its voice was deep and resonant, speaking perfect English with an accent Katie couldn't place. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "Who's asking?" Katie said, trying to keep her voice steady. Her hand drifted toward the plasma wrench on her workbench, though she knew it would be useless against something like this. "I am Vex Thor of the Korath," the being said, taking a step forward. "I am a blood hunter, authorized by the Galactic Commerce Authority to collect debts across all recognized territories. I am here regarding Daniel Morrison, deceased human, last known address Earth Colony vessel Wanderer, later registered on this station." Katie's stomach dropped. Blood hunters were legendary, the stuff of spacer stories told in bars to scare newcomers. They were debt collectors, but not the kind that sent reminders and threats. Blood hunters always collected one way or another. They could track anyone across star systems, and they had legal authority to use any means necessary. She had never expected to see one, much less have one say her father's name. "My father's dead," Katie said, her mouth suddenly dry. "Whatever he owed, it died with him." "Incorrect," Vex Thor said, and his lower right hand produced a data tablet that glowed with official seals. Under Galactic Commerce Code Section 743, all debts transfer to immediate family upon death of the debtor. You are listed as Daniel Morrison's sole heir and only living relative. Therefore, his obligations are now yours. Katie felt the world tilt around her. What obligations? How much? 200,000 credits, Vex Thor said, his glowing eyes never leaving her face. Owed to the Syndicate for goods received but never delivered. The debt was incurred 3 years ago and has been accruing interest at the standard rate. Your father died before collection could be made. You are now responsible. 200,000 credits. The number was so large it almost didn't feel real. Katie could work for 20 years and never see that much money. She could barely process what she was hearing. Her father had been a small-time smuggler, running supplies to colonies that couldn't afford official shipping. He had never mentioned owing anyone that kind of money. He had never mentioned the Syndicate at all. And everyone knew the Syndicate was not an organization you wanted to owe anything. I don't have that kind of money, Katie said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. I have 3,000 credits. That's it. That's everything. I am aware, Vex Thor said. I have reviewed your financial records. You have 3 options under galactic law. First, you may pay the full amount immediately. Second, you may enter indentured servitude for a period of 15 standard years, during which your labor will be sold to pay the debt. Third, you may accept alternative collection methods. What does that mean? Katie asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. It means I may claim you as property of the Syndicate, to be utilized as they see fit until the debt is satisfied, Vex Thor said, his tone completely neutral, as if he were discussing the weather rather than her entire future. This may include labor, biological material harvesting, or sale to third parties. The choice is yours, but you must choose now. Katie's mind raced. 15 years of servitude would take her into her 40s, and she would never be free. The third option sounded even worse, and she didn't want to imagine what biological material harvesting meant. But she didn't have 200,000 credits. She didn't have any way to get 200,000 credits. Her father had done this to her, left her with a debt she couldn't pay and a future that looked like a nightmare. I need time, Katie said desperately. I need to verify this debt, talk to a lawyer, something. You can't just show up and tell me I'm a slave now. You may verify the debt, Vexthor said, and he held out the tablet. All documentation is legal and certified. As for time, you have until I finish explaining your options and marking you with the debt brand. Then you belong to the syndicate or you pay. Those are the only choices that exist. He reached toward her with his lower right hand, and Katie saw something glowing in his palm. Instinct took over. She didn't think, didn't plan, just acted. Her hand shot out and grabbed his, not to push it away, but to shake it. She gripped his hand firmly, looked directly into those glowing amber eyes, and held on like her life depended on it. Vexthor froze completely. His other 3 hands stopped moving. His eyes widened slightly, the first emotion Katie had seen from him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Their hands locked together. Then Vexthor made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. You invoke bond right, he said quietly. And now there was something different in his voice, surprise maybe, or disbelief. A human invokes bond right. I did not think this day would ever come.